Hello and welcome to another Halloween themed episode of Levels Plus Whenever. This is 157. We'll be talking about spooky enemies and bosses from video games today, figuring out which is the worst. Let's get into it. Welcome to my top 50 horror-based, mostly, enemies and bosses in video games list. It's kind of like my favorite men, women lists, in that I built it in PowerPoint. And I have grabbed a variety of renders and artwork to represent these 50 characters that I think best define scariness or being in a horror-themed something. There's some enemies that aren't in a horror-themed thing. There's a Mario enemy or two in here, for example. But the aesthetic and the vibe that the enemy generates is fear and terror and fright. And I think that that works just as well as Vertigo from Resident Evil, who is explicitly a horror enemy. Right? So let's just run through the list real quick. So, as you've seen for a bit, Vertigo from Resident Evil, Regeneradors from Resident Evil, and Lickers from Resident Evil. I kept things to 3 at a max, because otherwise there would be way too many Resident Evil things in here. And I think these 3 are my favorite enemies out of the whole series. So, a Red Aramer from Ghosts and Goblins. Yes, that's the SNK vs. Capcom Chaos art. I don't care. I love this art too much to not include it. Lurkers from Dead Space, Pregnant from Dead Space, and The Pack from Dead Space. Death from Castlevania, Persephone from Castlevania, and Medusa Heads from Castlevania. Red Pyramid Thing from Silent Hill, as well as the Bubblehead Nurse, and the Memory of Alyssa from Silent Hill. Metroids themselves from their titular franchise, along with the SAX. Yes, this is a Metroid Prime render. I don't care. And Dark Samus from Metroid. Bongo Bongo from Legend of Zelda, along with Redeads and Dead Hand. Phanto from Super Mario Bros. Booze from Super Mario Bros. And Dry Bones from Super Mario Bros. And the Chainsaw Fish from Wario Land, because I consider Wario Land to be a separate franchise. The Reaper from Kid Icarus, Medusa from Kid Icarus, Zoda from Star Tropics, Bonehead from Star Tropics, the Big Daddy from BioShock, as well as the Little Sisters from BioShock, Sarcophagus Domsey from Beyond Good and Evil, along with the Spirit Eater, Harvesters from Body Harvest, the Mailman from Shadow Hearts, along with the Mutant Frog and the Happy Creeper. Meg. I'm gonna totally mess up her name if I try to say the Greek full name, so we'll just say Meg from Hades. Torahime from Muramasa the Demon Blade. Chrysalids from XCOM, along with the Faceless and Andromedons. Mimics from Dragon Quest, along with Skeletons and the Archdemons. Nagas from Chrono Trigger, along with Lavos. The Oge from Kiki Kakai. Homo Avades from Metaphor Refantagio. Homo Jaluzo. The Ghost from Pac-Man. Mavora from Tchia. And that is the end. I've gone through and I have taken that list of 50 that we just reviewed very briefly, and we now have 15. And I'm going to talk a bit about these 15 because I think that they define the essence of terror in some way. These are the enemies that I think best capture the essence of being afraid of something. And Vertigo is my Resident Evil choice. I narrowed down everything from Resident Evil down to 1. And Vertigo is my favorite boss in all of Resident Evil, and is one of my favorite bosses in any video game. And when I think about terror, I think about something that is unseen stalking you. And the more out there and abstract and strange this stalker is, the more terrifying it becomes in a lot of ways. I think that the element of being stalked is something that is truly terrifying. And Vertigo hides in the pipes and ventilation of this tube that you're in these tunnels, and ambushes you with his sharp tail, and leaps out at you and tries to chase you down. And the sound effects are so effective of it slapping its feet on the wet ground as it gets closer and closer to Leon. And you have to freeze it in order to truly do damage to it. And you have to react. You have to be on your toes. You have to be dodging attacks and constantly on the move. And you can't really attack it until you set it up to be taking damage. You can shoot at Vertigo all you want in its regular form, but you're not going to do a whole lot of damage because of its armor. So there's just so much that was done well, both in the original RE4 and in the remake, that I just adore this boss fight and this design and this character so much. This is one of the only bosses, I think, in Resident Evil history you can choose to not engage with. You can leave. And that is actually even more terrifying, because even though the game doesn't force Vertigo back into it at any point if you decide to skip that boss fight, it just makes you wonder if it's around still, you know? So I didn't rank these. They're in the same order as we went through, but I would say Vertigo is pretty close to number 1, if not my number 1 choice here. I just think that it's so effective. Red Arimer is really like the forebear for scary enemies in a lot of ways. They show up in Ghosts and Goblins, sitting there confidently, waiting for you to get in range. Then they shoot up in the air, way out of range of most of your weaponry, and just come at you at these obscene angles at a rapid speed that Arthur barely has time to react to. And then they are tanks. They take so many hits. And they're just constantly barraging you the whole time. And absolutely memorable first encounter. And they set the stage for future brushes with multiple Red Arimers at the same time. And more advanced versions. It's wild. You can see why they gave Red Arimer a name and a sub-series all his own, and why Firebrand in Gargoyle's Quest 1 and 2 and Demon's Crest became enough of an icon to be in fighting games. This character, this enemy, this legend is truly deserving to be among the best of the best in horror, in my opinion. Dead Space has so many. Dead Space has so many enemies that truly inspire disgust and fear. But I think the pack in Dead Space 2 are the worst because of their numbers. When you see one, you know there's more coming. And they are a swarm-style enemy. Their purpose is to surround Isaac and make it almost impossible for him to deal with any of them because they're on top of him so fast from many angles. And the fact that they are children as well adds to the disgust factor of having to fight them off, having to kill these enemies. Even more than the lurkers, which were babies originally. This is truly more disturbing to me. And the noise they make as well is just terrifying. Truly scary enemies that I really think made Dead Space 2 the better game, in hindsight. Another iconic enemy, the Medusa heads of Castlevania. These enemies are scary for different reasons than everything else so far. They're pretty monotonous. They don't take many hits to deal with in most games. They have a set pattern. What makes Medusa heads scary is the mechanics of Castlevania. If, let's say in the first game, Simon takes a hit, if he is not crouched, he will fly backwards. Medusa heads start showing up when you have platforms that will either move or there's gaps and you will fall to your death. So you need to quickly adapt Simon's moveset around these undulating lines that are coming at you consistently in these areas and not take a hit, because if you get struck, you're going to fall or you're going to die. Both are bad. As the game progresses in the original Castlevania, then the challenges change. So they give you difficult enemies to deal with, like an axe armor, with Medusa heads also coming at you. So you have to maneuver around axes and Medusa heads at the same time. It's truly terrifying to be trying to manage so much with so little when these show up. And what they've done cleverly with Medusa heads in the Metroidvanias is throw them in areas where it's absolutely ungodly to deal with Medusa heads, like the clock tower, filled with spikes. And they're just doing their thing, and you still need to dodge them. But if you get hit, you're probably going to fall into a spike. And then those do like double, triple damage of most of the enemies in the game. Especially if you get hit by one of the yellow ones, which were introduced in, I believe, Symphony, that will turn you to stone. So Medusa heads are scary in a very different way than the prior three. They're not scary in how they look or even necessarily their behavior. It's how you have to respond to them and the consequences of failing to respond properly. That makes them terrifying, and I think truly legendary enemies. Red Pyramid Thing, or Pyramid Head, depending on what localization you're referring to, is a physical manifestation of James Sunderland's sexual frustrations that is very violent and very repressed, and letting out all of that compressed frustration on the very female-coded enemies in the game. And on Maria, for that matter. Red Pyramid Thing is a truly iconic boss that stands out in a series full of incredible monster designs. I think part of what makes Pyramid Head so effective is the relatively grounded design that, outside of the metal cone on its head, it's very human-esque. when you look at some of the enemies in Silent Hill, Pyramid Head is truly one of the most grounded. And I think that's what makes Pyramid Head so intimidating, is that it's almost something real. It's almost something that you could actually run into in real life. And that in itself is frightening. And then when you see how destructively, sexistly violent it is, it just adds to that tension and adds to that fear. And when you then realize that James is manifesting this as his own internal demon, it says a lot about him. And it says a lot about where the events of the game are taking you. Iconic enemy, truly. Silent Hill has 2. I feel that for everything Red Pyramid Thing / Pyramid Head is to James, the memory of Alyssa is to Heather in Silent Hill 3. And unlike Pyramid Head, where the metaphor is more unclear until you get deeper in the game, the memory of Alyssa is very specifically the past of Heather. This is the burnt, charred stain of all of the suffering that she went through in her original body, manifested and angry at her for leaving her behind and taking on this new life, and will do whatever she needs to do to make Heather's life end. It's terrifying in a very different way, and Heather's story is very different from James. Heather went through a lot to get to where she is now, and this is basically what remains of her past, is this memory, this burned body wearing her clothes, staring back at her. And it's a really memorable moment in that game. I think it's a very powerful boss encounter. Probably my favorite in Silent Hill 3. It's on the merry-go-round, so it's got a very powerful backdrop. And just the way that the game handles that scene, because things change as the fight happens, because that's just what Silent Hill 3 does so well. It's a really great boss fight, and another, just for me at least, iconic encounter with terror. Seeing all of the trauma physically represented in front of you. Truly, truly legendary in my opinion. Metroids. Metroids are terrifying in their franchise, especially in Metroid and Super Metroid, where I feel that their isolation to the end of the game and the fact that they are like the de facto last stand that you have against, like the last line of defense before you get to Mother Brain in both games, are amazing. But I think what makes them truly terrifying, more so than anything else, is the fact that they are truly benign creatures that have been manipulated into what they act like in these games. Metroids in their original home of SR338 weren't really hurting anybody, as best as I understand. They were probably draining the life energy out of the X-parasites that were there, and possibly other life forms that were on the planet. But in the grand scheme of things, they were not a weapon. They were just creatures having an existence. And the space pirates took them and weaponized them and turned them into killing machines and guardians for their most secretive work. And in the original Metroid and Super Metroid, they are so fast, and they latch onto you so quick, and there's only a couple limited things you can do to make them stop attacking you. Ice beam, missiles. And Super Metroid takes this element of a creature that needs your energy to thrive and takes it to a narrative peak by having you rescue a baby Metroid in Metroid 2, work to save it from the space pirates, and almost watch it kill you, and then watch it fight for you to defend you, and then die in the process. The attachment that it actually generates with this one baby Metroid is astounding in its simplicity. There's not a single word of dialogue in that final moment when Samus interacts with the baby after it nearly kills her. It runs off and then attacks Mother Brain a little bit later and pulls energy out and gives it back to Samus. It's some of the best visual storytelling in a video game I've ever had. And that's what I think makes the tragic story of Metroids as enemies of terror so sad and so impactful, is because these creatures have feelings. These creatures have memory. These creatures have a connection that they can build with other creatures. And we lose that by the very state of looking at what they're capable of versus the entirety of what a Metroid is. I think that Metroids are truly impactful enemies, not only because of their killing potential, because they are very potent at that, but because of the terror that exists within other species. To take something that was not intended to be used as a weapon of war, as a weapon of defense, as a weapon against others, and turned them into that. And that ended up eradicating the entire species, save one, which is Samus, in the end, because of the DNA she was injected with. So I could have almost thrown Samus at the end of Dread in here, because she basically goes full-on rogue against Ravenbeak and turns fully into a Metroid that needs to drain energy to survive, and becomes a Metroid almost in body. Her armor transforms into a Metroid-like look. She becomes alien in a way that is, in a sense, its own terror. That you have this much power inside of you. I'm really curious to see where Metroid goes next in the storyline following Dread, honestly, because I think that Dread set up a lot of interesting potential for her. But to come back to Metroids, they're scary, but I think what's scarier is the handlers. While Metroid Fusion is not my favorite in the series by any stretch of the imagination, it's pretty low, honestly, compared to Super Metroid and Dread and Zero Mission and Prime. I would probably put it like at 6th or 7th overall on the list of Metroid, which will be a video at some point. The SA-X and how it was handled, I think, was brilliantly done. In a game that has so many flaws with how it's structured and how it limits what makes a Metroid game a Metroid, which is freedom of navigation and movement. The SA-X coming in and being the most terrifying individual encounter in a 2D game that I think I've ever experienced to this day. says a lot about how effective they made this parasite that stole Samus's Super Metroid abilities for itself. Truly scary. I still remember moments of running away from this thing and just getting tripped up on one tiny platform, just missed the jump or didn't quite get the grip fast enough, and just getting totally wasted by the power difference between Samus at her strongest and Samus at that point at her weakest. It's truly frightening and so effective. So kudos to Nintendo for that element of fusion. I think they nailed it with the SAX, and they didn't quite recapture it with Dread with the Emmy. They tried, but it wasn't the same. All of my Zelda choices were from Ocarina of Time, which I think is fascinating because Bongo Bongo and Redead and Dead Hand, I think, dive into a horror aesthetic that the series hasn't really touched since. Like, we've had Redeads reappear. We've had other enemies kind of take on a scary mantle. And Majora's Mask is, of course, its own distinctive blend of terror with the moon and the Skull Kid in Majora's Mask. But I think that Ocarina just channeled something with its polygons that really sent chills down my spine, especially in the Shadow Temple, where all these things are. Dead Hand is my choice in the end because it is an enemy that is disgusting. It's an enemy that does really bizarre animations that are really unsettling. And then it just grabs you and then does weird shit to you. It's really unnerving to deal with Dead Hand in the game. And I just think that Nintendo has not recaptured that with anything that's followed Ocarina of Time in terms of just sheer fright in the Zelda series. They almost recaptured it with Tears of the Kingdom with the Gloom Hands. Those were really terrifying, especially when they show up out of nowhere. Almost as good, but not quite. Dead Hand still rules the roost. Mario has not had a ton of pure frightening enemies. Like, boos are cute. They have a little bit of a horror element to them, but it's like you look at them and they hide their face. Dry bones are unsettling because they are Koopa Troopa bones walking around. Fanto from Super Mario Bros. 2 explicitly is a creature of terror. And I popped off when Super Mario Bros. Wonder brought them back in the trailer that we saw, because they haven't really been in a game since Super Mario Bros. 2, or Mario All-Stars for that matter. And Fanto protects keys. So there's masks that protect keys. When you pick up a key, one of the masks comes alive and is doggedly persistent after you until you drop the key, and comes in like Red Arimer at weird angles, and you can't kill it. The only thing you can do about Fanto is you can get in the door that you're trying to unlock, or you drop the key for a little while to catch a breath. I don't even know if you could kill it with a Starman, which would be the only way that I could conceivably think of it, but I've actually never seen it happen in the many times I've played Mario 2, or seen it played. Fanto's just scary, and the design is perfect. I do think that the new design, just having it be all gold, is less interesting, but I don't care. It looks the same beyond that, and it's doing what I want it to do in Mario Wonder. I can't wait to actually see it in-game and re-engage with this delightful enemy that has been underutilized in the Mario franchise for so long. I like Reapers in Kid Icarus. I think they're a really fascinating idea for an enemy. It's an early example of stealth, where Pit has to avoid being seen by them. And if he fails, the Reapers will react and summon Reapettes to attack you and will run around the platform that they're on rapidly. And the music changes. It's really well executed in terms of just setting a tone about these enemies, that they are the type that you don't want them to see you. You want to try to sneak in the hits before you get spotted, or just dodge them altogether so you don't have to deal with their shenanigans. Really cool idea for an enemy type, and again, another really powerful enemy from Nintendo. Nintendo has some scary enemies in a lot of ways, even though their games are not typically scary. Big Daddy, on the other hand, is from a game that is thriving in horror. And I remember the first time I ran into one in BioShock and being floored at its size and ferocity. Because I'm pretty sure it killed me, and it was very graphic. When you get stronger and better weapons and more... What do they call them in BioShock? We'll just say powers for the lack of remembering what they decided to call their tonics. Maybe they were tonics. And being actually able to fight them on a more level playing field. They are designed from the start to be intimidating, and the little sisters that they protect are an important gameplay mechanic. You kind of have to interact with them if you want to get more of the... God, it's been so long since I played BioShock. The morality, we'll just say. You either harvest the little sisters or you let them go. And if you harvest them, you get more of the goods that you use to power your stuff. But if you let them go, you actually get a better ending, and they give you items as you play through the game. So there's this morality element of, oh, well, do I want to take this little sister, or do I want to let her go so that way I get stuff later? So Big Daddies are there to prevent you from doing the former, and they want you to die if you get anywhere near them. And I think it's interesting that the sequel puts you in the role of a Big Daddy and lets you see things from their perspective. But they're just intimidating enemies, and I don't think that Infinite was able to replicate that with anything that they did. Harvesters from Body Harvest. So Body Harvest is a game that you're probably not that familiar with. It was an N64 title. I've talked about it a couple of times here. I wrote a Hardcore Gaming 101 article on it several years ago. That's still on that website. It was the predecessor of Grand Theft Auto 3. I think a lot of what is in Body Harvest set the stage for Grand Theft Auto 3 in terms of its gameplay. And while I think Body Harvest is the better game because I've never liked the 3D Grand Theft Autos, the way that Body Harvest set such a great tone for me as a game is through just the sense of urgency. So the purpose of Body Harvest is you are a futuristic soldier that has been sent back in time to try to stop the alien invasion that ultimately destroys Earth. And in that process, you have to stop the aliens from harvesting people, thus the name Body Harvest. The harvesters, which you see here, are enemies that you need to immediately destroy. You can see on the bottom left of this screenshot that there's a face. That face represents the number of people that the harvesters have harvested for the destruction of the Earth. If that meter gets full, the Earth is gone. So there is a sense of urgency and terror when you have an alien horde come in and a harvester is involved with them. Because you have to dodge all the other enemies, or take them out as best you can with the weapons you currently have. And then rush to the harvester and try not to get captured yourself in the gel blobs that they send out that will harvest up people, and destroy it before it can really eat anything. The enemies are attacking the houses and breaking them down, and people rush out. This game actually has destructible environments. It's really kind of cool. So it is up to you to stop all of these harvesters. And the game just is a really good balance of action and tension, where you have the ability to fight back, but at the same time, you are under pressure to fight certain enemies so that way the game continues on. And you have to get through 5 time zones, if I remember correctly, in order to fully beat the game. And it's a big game. These maps are enormous. And when a harvester shows up, it's like, oh, I gotta switch. I gotta focus on that. I gotta deal with that. And watching all these people get sucked up by all of these blobs and get munched while you're trying to get to it is terrifying. It's a really good recreation of like Them, or other similar style of older films. I think it's a really good game, and I think that the harvesters are a great example of why this whole idea of alien invasions works so well as a means of horror. The mailman enemy from Shadow Hearts. This was an enemy design that I just thought was wild. And when it first actually showed up on my screen when I played Shadow Hearts, I was like, this is one of the most inventive enemies I've ever encountered in a game, period. It is a dead dog with an arm coming out of its mouth that is suspending the dog in the air. Absolutely wild and terrifying that this parasitic thing has taken over the body of this poor animal and is beating you with it as its means of attack. It is unsettling for sure. And in a game that truly captured what a horror RPG could represent, despite some localization problems, despite voiceover problems, despite some other problems that got kind of ironed out as the series progressed, none of the other Shadow Hearts games, maybe Kodelka, because I haven't played it yet, captured the raw fear and bizarreness of enemy design the way the original did. And I just think that this is a truly memorable enemy out of all of the ones I've encountered in all of games. I remember this one. XCOM's got a lot. We saw 3 of them. I could have picked any of them from XCOM 2 because I think they are all scary in their own ways. But there's something about chrysalids in both XCOM Enemy Unknown / Within and XCOM 2 / War of the Chosen that makes them awful. They are awful enemies because they're fast. They make more enemies out of their actions. They come at you and hit like a brick. If they don't outright kill you, they are going to knock your soldier basically into critical mode. And they often come in packs. So it is not just like a simple thing to deal with them. It usually becomes an ordeal very fast. And they made them worse in XCOM 2 because they will basically birth more of them out of people instead of turning people into zombies. So it's remarkable how much more disgusting that actually is in contrast. And they can do that to your own people. So it's just bad. Chrysalids are bad. I love them. They terrify me. I would put Chrysalids up as possibly, if I put Vertigo as the boss for me in horror, Chrysalids are the enemy. I think that they truly embody everything that is terrifying in so many ways to me when I encounter them. And that is the end of the list, which I think was a really well formulated list by the time it all got done, because I ended on the enemy I feel is the most terrifying, and I started with the boss that I think is the most terrifying. Thank you so much for joining me for this, and I appreciate you. I just want you to know that. I hope you have a safe, fun, and spooky in a good way, and not in a bad way, Halloween. And I will see you in November for some more Levels Plus Whenever. Take care.